Dr. Handysides, many years practicing and in his specialties, and now in these modern days, the leader for our health and temperance work in our church. British in his background, and you can hear that beautiful accent this morning again. And I should add one secret on him. You know, water is one of the 8 cures that Mrs. White talks about. Dr. Handysides is very focused on that. Next to drinking water, he also paddles on water and he dives down into water. Dr. Handysides, it's your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you all. And begging your pardon, I'm going to move the tulips because I'm only a short guy and it looks as though I'm eating tulips. And I'd like to see you, and I'm very pleased to be able to see you. The topic that I was given to talk about was the topic of healing. Is it the same as cure? Actually, it wasn't quite that simple. They used a big word. They said, healing and cure, are they synonymous? And you know, I have a simple mind. So I reduce big words to small words. Big ideas, I try to make to small ideas, because the essence of understanding is to make it simple. To the average non-medical person, you ask that question, and perhaps not even thinking, they're going to say, yes, it's the same thing. To us as health people who are interested in health, we have to say, well, perhaps they wouldn't have asked this question if it were quite so simple. So we better think about it. And I thought about it, and I went to a little book that I have in my library, which is a book called Word Origins. It's actually written by a very nice man called Wilfred Funk, who was the son of the person who started Funk and Wagnall's dictionaries. You've probably heard of that name. Well, he declares that cure comes from the Latin word cura. See, I didn't study Latin at school. My learned colleague, Dr. Landless, studied Latin. Cura comes from cura is the Latin word from which cure comes. We get many other things. I have to sort of press this button to remember. My assistant thought that this curate was a handsome-looking dude. You know, she's interested in handsome-looking dudes. You notice the little clerical collar there indicates that he's a curate taking care of his parishioners. A curator in a museum takes care of the artifacts in the museum. And hopefully physicians take care as they cure their patients. On the other hand, you see, I'm having a little trouble with on the other hand, the word for healing comes from a Latin word unus, which means unity. And hopefully, if we could hear the choir singing there, they would be singing in harmony and in unity. And so from that word unus, we derive happy words such as holy, health, healing, wholesome. The English hale and hearty. So are they interchangeable? Well, you know, sometimes when two trees grow close together and they intertwine, we could think that it was the same tree. But if we were to look at it very carefully, we would see that the tree had 2 separate roots. And there are powerful implications for us as health professionals to realize that there are different roots. It doesn't take much intelligence for me, who did a lot of surgery, to realize that all my activities, all the medications that I would administer, were dependent not so much upon my skill, as I both would cut and sew, as it was upon the reparative ability of the tissues to blend, to put themselves back together again. I'll tell you a story, because stories are much more interesting than perhaps the things that I would do. You might be looking at that picture and saying, living in a cloud. Well, it reminds me of a patient that came to see me when I was in Lesotho. This patient, she lived in a cloud. The cloud that she lived in was the smell of ammonia, because she had a vesico-vaginal fistula. An obstructed labor had resulted in her actually forming a hole between the vagina and the bladder. The pressure of the head behind the pubic bone had just devitalized the tissue. And afterwards she had a hole, and a hole between the bladder and the vagina will drain. And the cloud in which she walked around in was a cloud that everybody could smell her. Now, you might say, well, that could be surgically corrected very easily. Well, you might think so, but she had undergone 5 operations over a period of some 5 to 10 years. And so when she presented herself to me, not only did I smell this ammoniacal effluvia, but I realized that she had a major problem. And like other physicians, now that she'd been operated on 5 times, I was somewhat apprehensive about taking her on as a patient. In fact, I said, I'm not sure about this. But you know, she had pathetic pleas, because she knew that I was the only gynecologist in the country of Lesotho at that time. She said, I'm ostracized. She didn't quite say it like that. She said, nobody wants to be around me. She wanted me to please try. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to take you on. I found in the course of investigating her that she had, besides the hole from the bladder to the vagina, which you can see there if you know your anatomy enough to see it, she had a stone in the bladder. Now, the stone in the bladder was about the size of an olive. I don't know whether it was a Portuguese olive or an Italian olive. I'm not sure whether it was a Greek olive. I don't know whether it was a marinated, but it was about the size of an olive. And I knew that if she was going to be cured, it would require the removal of that stone, because the removal of the stone would remove an impediment to healing. And so in the course of my reparative work on her, I removed the stone. I repaired her in layers, taking care not to leave suture material within the lining of the bladder, because that is why she had formed a stone. And I brought down a layer of omentum and put it between the bladder and the vagina, further fortifying my repair. And then I placed a catheter to drain the bladder and watched her on the ward. On the 10th day, I very carefully removed the catheter, and to my great delight, and probably to her even greater delight, found that she was now dry. Aha! I had cured the patient. No. I knew that I had permitted her to be healed. The curing process that I had involved in was the removal of obstacles to healing. And that is what so many of us fail to understand, especially arrogant physicians. So here we had this bladder. I'm trying to get the picture. Well, you missed the last one. That's fine. I was able to send her home. This is the type of home that she would go to in Lesotho. They build magnificent homes, hewn stones. I've seen them actually hew these stones out of a chunk of rock, and then they build these lovely houses. But she went home unhealed. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, having removed the stone, I knew that she was more than a leaking bladder. I knew that she now although she had a confidence in her unobtrusiveness, although she could perhaps seek to regain her dignity, although perhaps she could seek to establish a new relationship with a husband that must have suffered over those years, she also would now have to come to terms with the villagers in her community who had always sniffed perhaps when she went by, and perhaps held their nose like this, and perhaps mimimoked behind her, thinking that she didn't have that third eye at the back of her head. You see, I knew that she had a lot more healing to go on, because there would be scars in the vagina, no longer the flexible, supple tissues. My suture material and my operative things would leave scars there. I knew that she had to get her mind around the shame that she had experienced. I want you to think about that word shame, because we in health ministries are so good at sometimes thinking we are actually doing a healing ministry, but we induce shame. I refer you back to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. How many of you would be unashamed today if you were naked? We carry shame. Shame of our body habitus. Shame because we feel we are somehow inherently not good. So, what she needed was healing. She herself needed healing. Not her bladder and the hole. She needed healing. She, the comprised of her physical, mental, spiritual, need to be made whole. Each part needed to be made whole for her to be made whole herself. You see, just as we have members of the physical, such as our lungs and our heart and our digestive system, our kidneys, the skin, we also have the emotional and the social. All the relationships of life need to be healed if we are to truly be healed. So what is the relationship between cure and healing? I want to posit to you that cure is the removal of impediments to God-empowered healing. Now, I realize that there may be people who are not Adventists who are seeing this or hearing me talk about this. And I want you to understand I am talking the Adventist perspective on cure and on healing. Consider a few scenarios with me. First of all, let's think about somebody who has infection. We give them antibiotics. Do we cure them? Well, if the bacteria are sensitive to the antibiotics, they die, and the body cures. Perhaps we think about neoplasia, cancer. You know, we as a surgeon cut the cancer out, but we are trusting that the God-given abilities of the body will heal. Perhaps we use chemotherapy. We kill off the bad cells, hoping that the good cells can recuperate and heal. Even in the non-communicable diseases, our lifestyle that we talk about so very, very popularly and are so keen on, when we do our lifestyle stuff, we're still dependent upon a God-given capacity to heal. You know, we say, somebody talks about reversing diabetes. You couldn't reverse diabetes unless there was a healing capacity built in to the body. Even if we were to look at other things like metabolic diseases, where we try to bring a balance, our cures are only attempts to permit healing. Now, you know, our reality is a complex concept. Some people say, what is it to be real? Well, to be real, I don't think you can divorce it from the actions of God. That's what makes a Christian, an Adventist in particular, feel that God is central to this message of healing. You see, we might ask ourselves, what is so important? Like a beautiful woman who invests her value in the reflection of a mirror, too many of us in Adventist health ministry have reflected the value only of the physical. We have not thought in depth about the necessity for healing. That's why we shame people when their blood pressure is high. Or if we find that they weigh too much, we shame them because they eat too much. We shame them by saying that if they had lived in thus and such a way, they wouldn't have perhaps got cancer. And so our focus, like that of this woman who sees her value in the reflection of the mirror, and we all know the ravages of time are going to destroy that value, if that's all it is, then we need to realize that there is far more to healing than just the physical. You only have to look at a patient with Alzheimer's disease who happens to be in good health to realize that good physical health, strong muscles, the ability to run quickly or to lift heavy weights have very little meaning if there is no mind. We take a lot of our work from the writings of Mrs. Ellen White. Ellen White separated the chaff from the wheat of the health reform movement, because the health reform movement was not born with Seventh-day Adventists. But it was her particular insight and capacity to sift the truth from the fiction that was helpful for us. So what am I saying? I'm saying then that therapeutic endeavors of an extrinsic human entity could be summed up in the terms cure. But the reparative processes built into the human organism and those reparative processes of a spiritual experience, that speaks to the healing of our shame is very, very much part of the healing mechanism. I'd like to talk a little bit about the ministry of healing. Ellen White wrote a book like that, but she always pointed out that there was a theology to our health ministry. We've recognized a theology to the health ministry, as Elder Cooper pointed out, for a long time, because hospitals for the sick. We've therefore decided to have an integrated approach to how we will approach whole person care. The remarks I'm going to make over the next little while, I owe a great deal of debt to Angel Rodriguez, who was the chair of the Adventist Biblical Research Institute. Angel Rodriguez, and his picture is there for those of you who have not seen him, he gave a very interesting lecture at a recent conference that I attended. He spoke about the teachings of Ellen White being central to our understanding of a health ministry and healing. She said, in teaching health principles, keep before the mind that the great object of reform, that its purpose is to secure the highest development of body, mind, and soul. Show that the laws of nature, being the laws of God, are designed for our good, that obedience to them promotes happiness in this life and adds to the preparation for the life to come. She also wrote in nature's laws. The material world is under God's control. The laws of nature are obeyed by nature. Everything speaks at the will of the Creator. So there is then a theocentricity in our health message, which introduces a morality to the health message. If it is God-centered, then there becomes a morality. Now, people don't like to talk about morality, but Seventh-day Adventists, we need to talk about the morality. We don't think of God as a passive healer. We believe that God, through the agencies of nature, is working day by day, hour by hour, moment by moment, to keep us alive, to build us up, and to restore us. When any part of the body sustains an injury, a healing process is at once begun. Nature's agencies are set at work to restore the soundness, but the power working through these agencies is the power of God. All life-giving power is from Him. When one recovers from disease, it is God who restores him, not you and your health message, not you and your surgical endeavors, not you and your dietary interventions. It is God. And there comes with that a responsibility that we give glory to Him instead of to ourselves, and that we leave to Him the judgment about the healing and the cure, and not take it upon ourselves to do that judging. And because God and Jesus Christ are one, this then means that this is a Christocentric doctrine. Why did He come? Why did He come? He came to give us health and peace and perfection of character. But the second element in the healing process is the recipient of the healing. It is us, the human. And the human that we are has a present capacity and a future capacity. And God, in His love and His graciousness, is not only interested in our current here and now, but in our future potential. And because He's interested in our future potential, there can be healing when there is not cure. I'm going to skip along a little bit because, there is a fair amount of time that I have to be careful about. Disease poses a threat to our present capacity, and it may require specific curative properties. But disordered thinking can produce disease and illness, just as much as disordered physical conditions can. And it's not just the healing of the present that we must think of when we think of us as humans. We must think of our potential. We must think of our ability to be healed into the future. Future potential. I once met a student who wanted to apply at the Hospital for Sick Children, which is one of the places that I studied at, to become a pediatric surgeon. As a pediatric surgeon, it's difficult to get in. They only have 1 or 2 positions. And finally, the list was brought down to 6. And the professor questioning him said to him, "Why should I choose you out of the 6 candidates? You've all written wonderful papers. You've all published scientific articles. You're all very bright. Your recommendations here show that you are all technically skilled. Why you?" And he confessed to me, "I didn't know what to say." Well, he was an African. And I said, I don't know, but if I was that professor, I would have thought, they're all at the same level. But look how far they've come to get here. Because the distance that they've traveled to get here shows the capacity for future development and potential. And having gone from a rather poor, economically that is, African background, and having achieved the same level as the affluent, rich, very favored other Canadian graduates, the examiner should have understood they're all the same, but he's traveled far, and his future potential must be much greater. Today he has a wonderful position. If it were possible for created beings to attain a full understanding of God and his works, then having reached this point, there would be for them no further discovery of truth, no growth in knowledge, no further development of the mind. To all eternity, men may be ever searching, ever learning, yet they can never exhaust the treasures of his wisdom, his goodness, and his power. I've already mentioned that the original pair were naked but unashamed. I've read a beautiful book. Actually, Stoy Proctor gave it to me. The book was entitled, I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't. In it, Brené Brown writes of the feelings of shame that take our lives and damn us. I once had a patient. She had cancer. She came into the emergency department and she was dying. As I spoke to her, I realized that she and her family were at loggerheads. I knew that I couldn't save her. She was going to die. Cancer was everywhere. But here she was in pain and misery because of the family tensions and dynamics. By spending time and going to her home doing house calls, I was able to be an agent of healing. And when she died, the family was together. She was healed and died without shame. I hope that people who experience your ministry will lose all shame. Thank you very much.